answers that question, but yeah. Yeah, anyways, yes?
How long did it take you to make one?
Good question, yeah.
Do you ever have a sound in mind, and when it's done, it's so off that you say, nah, I can't show this one, or?
You know, there are definitely times where I like battle that, and then there's times where, you know, I kind of have to be open to it a bit, and, you know, there's, yeah, I mean, that's kind of like a two-part question, right? So, you know, if it makes sound sometimes, I'm just happy, right? Especially with the ceramic pieces, right? Like, a lot of the pieces that are in this show in particular, they go through a very abusive process as far as clay is concerned. So, you know, I do some ceramic pieces that are like electric fired and things are a little bit more controlled. These pieces are all wood fired. And so, and that process can take anywhere from 2 days to 2 weeks. And you know, part of that is that it sort of opens up, you know, to the possibilities of, you know, getting these atmospheric surfaces that I really like. It looks kind of more natural or stone-like, and there's no way to really actually create that, you know, in a controlled way. And there's something really romantic to me about that process, right? Like going back to that, you know, if ceramics is my ethnography, if I was an anthropologist, like this is my way of engaging in a very traditional method, right? And recreating that, and you know, it's laborious, right? I mean, you're just stoking a kiln for, you know, like I said, 2 days to 2 weeks, constantly with wood, to get those surfaces. And you hope that,
use different kinds of wood, or?
Yeah, mixture, you know, I mean, some people are real sticklers about, you know, oh, I use this kind of software, this kind of hardwood, right? And sometimes it's also just what you can get your hands on, especially if it's, you know, 5 days into the firing and you're trying to make temperature, and you're like, all right, what else do we have here to burn because I'm out of wood? That has happened. And they do, I mean, different woods and even their history gives a different surface, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you look at like Japanese wood-fired pottery and they figured out, oh wow, these logs that we got from the beach, you know, they soaked up all of this salt now from the ocean, right? Or these trees that were sourced over here, they're bringing up these kinds of minerals, you know, whether it's metal oxides or whatever from the soil. And all of that gets deposited on the work.
Sure.
And all of that melts and it becomes something that's very unique and encapsulated in time. But, yeah, so you hope that it even makes sound. To answer the other question, that was like, as far as like, okay, you know, there is also an element of responding to the work too. And I think that question reminds me a bit of what some of what Margie said, right? And that I think that the process is so much about some serendipity and about this, your engagement with it. It's a dialogue that you're having with yourself and with the material, right? I think a successful piece for me isn't something that, you know, as much as I try to be like, it's gonna be like this, if it doesn't end up like this, and if it can be a mirror back to me, and I can learn something in the process, that's successful to me. And that's the most intriguing part, right? So like this piece here in the center, for example, right? You know, I may have had some other ideas or whatever about, you know, the sound and everything initially, but, you know, it was interesting because like, all right, I made I made one other like larger whistling vessel before this, and I was playing around with it, and I knew that for safety purposes, I had to attach this thing down to some sort of base, and I was using some aircraft cable or whatever, and that was interesting to me. So I was like, all right, let's just like go with that, and I'm looking at the bridges around Chicago, and you see these massive concrete counterweights, right, and cables and everything, and the drawers, and I'm like, that's so cool, right? That's interesting. Well, around that same period of time, I lost my grandfather, and you know, I grew up going to his house, and he was a scientist. You know, he was a microbiologist, and he was a lot of different things to me. And he, you know, my grandparents had this beach house, and so I grew up going to visit them, and we, you know, walked the beach, and he would pick up these rocks from the dunes, and you know, being a microbiologist, you know, he'd be such a nerd about it, and he'd pick it up this, and he'd see these little perforations in there. He'd be like, oh, this is the fossil of this thing, this time period, right? And then he would just so effortlessly toss it out in the water, back on Lake Michigan, and you'd see this thing skip. And you know, there's something really magical about that. You know, when you're a little kid, you're like, man, there's this element of science there, but there's also like this element of wow, you just, you know, bringing weightlessness, right, to this thing that's so heavy and solid. And so after he passed, I was like, oh, maybe I'll make an urn for him or something. And I just started collecting rocks off the beach again, and I had them floating in my shop and wherever. And with, you know, I was just sketching completely, you know, unaware of like that thing that I was gonna do. You know, I just start sketching out plans for the next piece, and I was just, I didn't even know why at the time, right? But I was like, okay, yeah, I like this shape, right? And it sure happened to be, you know, basically this rock that I picked up off the beach, and I made the thing, and it took me months. And then I was like, I don't know about the sound, but then, I don't know, give it another push, you know? You know, and I was like, man, that kind of takes me back to the beach a little bit, you know? Like, and I kind of like that. And then we were talking about what to name it, you know, and I just loved, you know, it was like, I looked at my grandpa like he was Carl Sagan. There was something about mixing science and you know, this sort of spiritual, you know, connection to the natural world that I loved. And like that was, you know, I connected with that. That was like my spirituality. That was like his. And I'm like, what am I gonna call this piece? And like, Lord, you know, Margie's like, she said it better than I could have, you know. And that was the story.
What's the name?
It's Lord. Yeah. So I think about it like, that's my grandpa's story. Right, that's what he gave me.
You've killed the cliche of pet rock.
I actually, it's funny, I have my coat with me, and now like I literally have like 3 different kinds of things that I picked up off the dunes. It's just
Shells of rock.
Yep. Yes. Yes.
So what's the mechanism? How does it work?
Okay. Yeah. So a lot of these pieces contain water, right? Yeah. I think hopefully there's enough water still in this thing. Yeah, seems to look like probably needs a refill. But yeah, so there's I should just say liquid, but in all these pieces it's water for all intents and purposes. And there's actually chambers inside of each of these sculptures. And so that water flows between these chambers, and it pressurizes the air that's inside of it. I probably haven't ironed this, I hope everyone can hear me. And it pressurizes the air that's inside of that chamber, and you know, pushes air through these whistles. So yeah, I sculpt these little whistles inside, and yeah. So in these smaller ones, it's more like a traditional like chamber duct kind of thing, like you would see in Mesoamerica. And then in these larger pieces, I kind of explore other things, like, you know, making organ pipes. Like there's a piece in Oak Park, and I made 18 organ pipes to go inside of the thing, so they can, you know, but they're all pressurized with liquid.
there an intake or for the air?
Yeah, there has to be air intake, to fill the chamber, but then, but it also has to, seal it off, and then, the plumbing's a little goofy. I've messed up a lot.
There's nothing mechanical, there's nothing moving.
There's no moving parts. Right, yeah.
Well, except the liquid.
Except for the liquid, right.
Can't
The
slosh it out.
vibrations of the whistle, right? That's what-
Yeah. Anybody else? Yes.
Could you speak a little bit about how you come up with the forms and the shapes that you juxtapose together so often?
Yeah, so, I mean, there's a lot of like playing around with, pencil and paper, and also clay is just a very responsive medium. But I'd say the majority of the pieces, I'll sketch a lot of things out ahead of time. And I'm looking at, I think for me, I'm just really interested in like, especially these days, looking at, these like Neolithic tools and artifacts, just like stone artifacts, and there's some element where it's like, okay, I feel like those forms, there's some element of like timelessness to it, and utilitarian aspect of it, that I feel like it kind of, maybe, to me at least, it evokes some sort of intuition about, okay, this is something that I don't just look at, like, there's something that I'm supposed to interact with here, right? So a lot of the forms that I have, like, I mean, especially like the round bottom, right? Which is so like evident in this thing where it's like, okay, that doesn't even make sense. It shouldn't be standing upright. So there's a level of precariousness there. But yeah, I mean, I think that having the round bottom there, it's like, okay, yes, visually, sure, it's about, creating some lift to the piece, but it's also about implying some sort of functionality to it. Yeah.
Back to your earlier point, what you said about making a rock weightless, from where I'm sitting, so much depends on the light of this from here where I see it, that it is made weightless. You really did it there.
I like
I
that.
just happen to be here.
Thank you. Yeah, this one's actually kind of like maybe a little bit of an outlier as far as like, okay, I'm looking at stone tools. This one was more like, all right, I was just playing around with a lot of different forms. I started actually with a solid chunk of clay and started carving away with it. And yeah, just stick something on, take something off, and in the end, it's like, whether I intended to or not, it's another one of those sort of serendipitous things. I'm like, all right, like it's very sailboaty, you know what I mean? It's just like, yeah, but I like that kind of element, right? So that piece is actually called Explore.
It wants to take off.
Right. A little bit of my wanderlust there while I'm just like cramped up in the studio. I'm like, I really want to get out. Yeah.
The ones in the other room was almost like metal. In fact, I wasn't sure. So
Yeah.
They looked very metallic.
Yeah.
That they could be metal.
Yeah, I get that a bit, and I can see that. Yeah, I mean that's so
I
much
wasn't
about.
sure,
Yeah, a lot of that's the firing process, right?
Skill with ceramics.
I hope so. I try to be. I don't know. Yeah. I mean that's like it's all flame and that atmosphere in there, and yeah, like I said, the ash of the tree. I mean, at 2,400 degrees, it just turns to a blaze, right? Yeah. Yes.
Me?
Yeah.
Okay. I was curious about like that moment when you realize that it can be interacted with, and like I've seen your piece in Oak Park, and walked past it and not thinking that it could be engaged with.
Yeah.
And like especially also in an art exhibition, and like feeling like you can't touch things, or you aren't supposed to because it could break. I'm curious, like, one, like, how you think about that, but also, how you engage with it. It seems like there's like, maybe like one movement or one push or one like direction in the way that you're working with form. So I just wanted to.
Yeah. So, no, I mean, that's a good question. I know that in the gallery atmosphere, it's like particularly, I mean, we're just, especially as adults, we're taught, you know, for the most part not to. The interesting thing to me is like, seeing kids with it, that don't know better, and they just do it.
Yeah.
They figure it out. Like, I mean, I've seen, the first time I showed this, like, you know, they couldn't even, you know, reach up to the piece, but I saw them playing with the counterweight, you know? And to me, that's really interesting, and I like the idea of it. It's kind of like, you know, the early Mesoamerican, you know, whistling vessels. It's like, people didn't even know that they did this for a really long time, you know? And when they figured it out, you're like, okay, why? You know? I love that element of mystery and something that's also just kind of hiding in plain sight. And if somebody can suddenly discover that for themselves, there's like, ooh, like, I don't know, it comes alive again suddenly. So I actually kind of enjoy that aspect of it a bit. As far as engaging with it, that's, you know, that's totally a personal thing, right? And, you know, for some pieces, you know, I think that just the physics of it is like, okay, I'm kind of limited to like, it's gonna do this, right? But for some of the things that I particularly spend more time with and have more control over, I will try and treat that, you know, with a little bit more deliberation, right? So like that piece in Oak Park, you know, I'm like, okay, I know that the tuning is gonna change the moment I enclose this thing. So I also have to figure out all the way backwards, right? How am I actually constructing it? I'm gonna have to make the shell of it removable as I'm going so that I can tune pipes as I'm building it before I finally enclose it, right? And I thought, and I, you know, played around with notes on a guitar. I played around with a tongue drum, right? And I like to think about these things as, you know, almost like a singing bowl, right? You know, something that's kind of meditative. And, you know, so when I go up to it, or my partner go up to it, like, that was kind of an interesting thing where like, you know, and she's a dancer, so like, you know, it's like, it's really interesting to engage with these things and movement. And like, you can see, you know, like each other through the piece and be moving this thing. And for me, that was another serendipitous moment. I'm like, oh yeah, it's not just about being present in the moment with yourself. It's like, there's this opportunity for connecting with another person too, in that moment, so, yeah. Yes?
The piece in Oak Park, it sounds like it's outside.
Yeah, it
So
is.
same sorts of material?
Similar, yeah, it's, that one's fiberglass, on the exterior, and there's also, I use metal powders actually in like the whole process, so it's like a cold casting. So it has like an actual, oxidized finish to it, right? Just as if you were to cast, you know, real steel or bronze or whatever, and leave it outside. So it's a living finish. But yeah, the only difference mainly is like, what do I fill it with? So I make like a homemade antifreeze concoction. So it lives out there, and I have to like, you know, bug and pest proof everything, and yeah, there's a lot of things to contend with as far as the elements and, you know, dealing with all of that. But
And there's a maquette, right?
there was a maquette, there were sketches, there were
There's a
computer
rendering.
renderings. Yeah, I mean, that whole project was about 3 years. Yeah.
And it's in the ground.
Yeah, I mean, there was a foundation that I had to design and engineer just to seat the piece, and it's like, it's part of the sculpture, it's like, even when I first met with the architect who was commissioning it, he's like, I kinda like the idea of it being like an Easter Island, and I was like, okay. So, in fact, part of the sculpture is actually buried under the ground.